Welcome to episode 124 of the How Did Happen podcast, hosted by Mike Malatesta. In this episode, Mike welcomes Dr. Hoby Wedler, an entrepreneurial visionary focused on creating companies that explore the sensory experiences.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the How Did Happen podcast. And as you heard in the introduction, I've got Dr. Hoby Wedler with me today. Hoby, thank you for making time for the podcast and welcome to the show.
Oh, Mike, it's a real honor. I've been a fan of the podcast for a long time now, and just what an honor to be invited on. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad you're here, and I do owe you being here to Justin Breen, who's become maybe both of our sort of super connector person for us. Justin was on the podcast a few episodes ago, and he's been a madman introducing me to other really great people like Hoby to connect with. Whether we do a podcast out of it or not is sort of another byproduct, but just the connection itself is something I'm grateful for. So, Justin, thank you for that.
Thank you, Justin.
He's done the same for Hoby.
He has, and can't thank him enough.
All right, so let's get into it. I start every one of my shows, Hoby, with the same question, and that is, how did it happen for you?
How did it happen? Well, it's a great question, and I'm gonna go back in time a little way. So I was born completely blind, and I guess I didn't know when I was a young kid what being blind really meant. It can, it's definitely a difference between me and the sighted world. But I feel like any difference that we have and anything that some might call a disadvantage, we can call an advantage and we can turn it into an advantage. And I think that mindset was developed early on by my parents. So it happened. How did it happen? Well, let me start saying what happened. When I was very young, my parents were nervous, first of all, when I was born. Okay, how do we raise a blind kid? How do we do this? But they took it upon themselves through the help of an amazing organization called the Blind Babies Foundation to really learn and figure out what it means to have a blind child and to hold extremely high expectations of that child. So they learned to have the same expectations for me, the same level of expectations, not necessarily the same things, but the same level of expectations for me and my sighted brother, who is 2 years older. And, they were like tour guides as I grew up. I was never afraid to ask questions. I was never shy. I was always very outgoing, which helped a lot. But even before I could really, enunciate and reason and speak that clearly, they would describe to me everything they were doing from, if you imagine a sighted child and imagine getting that child a bowl of cereal. Well, the child can see everything you're doing from a very young age. So they begin to create awareness that the bowls are in the cupboard, the cereal box is in a different cupboard, the milk comes out of the refrigerator, and the spoon that you're serving it with are in that drawer that we see them always go to every morning and get, and the napkins are in this other place. But really, as a blind child, you don't know that stuff. You don't pick that stuff up. So oftentimes it can feel like stuff just appears. So what my parents did amazingly well is they described exactly what they were doing as they moved, using the cereal bowl as an example, as they moved around the kitchen. Okay, here are the bowls, clank, clank, clank. Here's where we keep the box of cereal, shake, shake, shake. And now I'm opening the refrigerator where the cold milk is stored. So what I'm getting at is that they painted these pictures for me and allowed me to really grow up with similar knowledge to what a sighted child would gain. Obviously never going to be the same. And definitely, I'm not going to say mine was worse or better. It was just different. Mm-hmm. But they took it upon themselves to give me as much of that knowledge as possible, which was so amazing for me. They encouraged me to start making my lunches when I would go to school in elementary school. Anything I could do was like, yep, let's do that. And you're going to be independent. You're going to do that. And they were tough in a very loving way. And they never pushed me to do things that I didn't want to do. I think that's the biggest thing for me, is that they always told my brother and me that our lives were whatever we wanted to make of them. And it was our responsibility to be stewards of our lives and make good decisions. And I think ultimately they treated us with utmost respect and expected nothing short of equal respect in return. And they held those expectations super high. So that gave me a really good foundation. So it all happened, whatever it may be, happened on that foundation. Now, I've always loved understanding how things work and how things fit together. It's really been inspirational for me. When I was a 3-year-old, I remember figuring out that water, when you turn on the tap in your house, that water is coming from somewhere. It's not magically appearing under pressure out of this tap. So I got really fascinated with the plumbing system, not only of my house, but of the town, and the thought that there were these pipes and pumping stations and all these things all around us, making it so that we could have pressurized city water coming right to us. So that was an amazing thing and a really great opportunity for me to discover and learn and, really create good, healthy opportunity to think. And I love to think about electrical systems and, carpentry and how boards fit together. How do things fit together to make nothing but sense out of what we do and out of the life we live? And I think that's what drove me to love science. And I'd love to come back and tell some stories of really finding that love of science and how that worked. But for now, I'll just say that I ended up studying chemistry as an undergraduate student and ended up getting my PhD in organic chemistry before realizing that I didn't want to necessarily hold a full-time career in chemistry. I always say that if it takes getting a PhD to realize that, you've gone a little bit too far, or you're a Gemini like me and you just have a hard time making decisions. And I went from that to really being an entrepreneur. I actually was able to do a lot of entrepreneurial work with really interesting sensory tastings and nuanced tastings for people. Partnered with Francis Ford Coppola and many others while in graduate school, and sort of opened up those huge doors into the next chapter of my life. And I launched my company, co-founded my company in 2017. That company is undergoing a bit of a rebrand right now, which I can tell you about later. And now I'm in the process of starting yet another company. An e-commerce company that serves gourmet food with the brand promise of the utmost quality. So I've always been interested in food and drink. With SensePoint, my company that I started in 2017, it was very design focused, and now I've just got that itch to put some fun products out there and make people's culinary and sensory journeys just a little brighter.
Well, I want to dig into that for sure. That's a ton of stuff there. And I guess I want to go back and just start with what happened that made you blind?
It's a really interesting thing. They don't know. I was born with a condition called micro-ophthalmia, which literally translates to tiny eye. And I had one tiny eye in my left socket and one very large eye in my right socket that ended up having to be enucleated, which means removed. And both of what you see right now are actually acrylic prosthetic eyes. The micro eye, the smaller eye, is too small, so that we had to cover it. And this right eye is a full prosthetic. So I've never been able to see, and I've always had prosthetic eyes. And I think that's what has helped me and helped my journey, is that I've never known the world as a sighted guy, but I've learned it as a blind guy. And to be honest with you, Mike, a lot of people ask me, would you want to get your sight back? Wouldn't it be amazing to see the world? And my answer often surprises them, because the answer to that question is no. People always ask, well, why? Why not? I have to say the answer is that I've learned to live in this world, and I've learned the world as a blind person. I don't want to have to relearn it. I don't want to have to learn how to read again. I don't want to, I know the world very well that I live in. That makes sense.
It's funny because that makes sense to you, but it probably doesn't make sense to until you put it like that, because everyone's sort of just thinking, well, boy, life would be a lot easier if I could see, right? And,
Right.
and to say that I don't want to relearn how to read and I don't want to relearn how to do all these things that you've learned how to do, I think is something that wouldn't occur to a sighted person. It wouldn't have occurred to me until you said it.
Interesting. Yeah.
And what about, you talked about how your parents, with the help of Blind Babies Foundation, sort of learned how to create expectations for you that were challenging and similar to what they did for your brother, let's say.
Yeah.
What about other people in your life as you were growing up? Because I'm imagining that even though your parents are doing this, other people might, come in contact with you, for example, at school or something, and automatically want to approach or treat you differently.
It's a great question. And yeah, a lot of people didn't know that they could hold high expectations. And my attitude, and I think this was instilled in me by my parents and probably by other close family members who are just believers, I've always been, and we'll get into this later, but my ultimate desire and drive through life is that I have the heart of a teacher. I always want to get people to understand something maybe they didn't understand, and I want to get them excited about things they didn't know they were excited about. And I remember when I was 8 years old, talking to a group of actually teachers and students in one of my classrooms, and people saying, "Oh, that's right, Hoby probably can't do this," and it was some sort of drawing project. And I said, "No, I might not be able to do that, but we can modify it so that I can actually create something tactile that's the same level of artistic, expression, but maybe not done in the same way. So maybe I do things a little bit differently, but we can still get them done and accomplish the same task." So I always come at this from a perspective of, you got to educate. You can't just let people tell you what you're good at and what you're not good at. I know better than anyone else what I can do. And I love being able to share that with people. And I've done it. And I don't really know why. Some people ask me, well, why? How'd you know what you were doing and know how to do that? I don't really know, but I've been doing that since I was quite young. And I know a lot of other blind people, some of whom are very shy. And when you don't use your voice a lot, it's hard to get the same information. But I was the one who always sat in the front row of class, and my hand would pop up every time the teacher wrote something on the board that I didn't understand. And it was like, okay, what'd you just write? I think at the beginning it could be frustrating, but having to go back and read these materials off the chalkboard, actually slowed the class down a little bit and greatly helped all of my peers. That's what I've sort of found out, is that actually really helped. That style actually really aided them.
They were afraid to say something.
Exactly. Yeah. And with, of course I dealt with the bullies and all that, but I put all that behind me, because you're always going to find turkeys out there in the world, is what I say. And just get away from the turkeys and move on and find the people that you do want to spend time with that accept you for who you are. So that's what I've always done. And it's easier. I said it's making it sound so easy just now. It's not that easy. It's a lot easier said than done. But, I think it's important to, and what I've learned over the years as a blind person, just as a person, is that I do business and I interact with the people who I want to interact with. So I really surround myself with a good, positive thinking group of people.
You said two things along the way there that I'm really interested in exploring further before we get into science, which is
sure.
I'm also very interested in. First thing you said was something like, you love how things work and fit together, which was one thing, but then you said to make nothing but sense. I think you said that. So
I did, yeah.
What is that? So it was like, I got the first part, but then I've been thinking ever since you said it, to make nothing but sense, because that's not something I've thought about.
I don't normally say that, so it's funny that I just did, and it's really intriguing. So when I think about it, what I mean by that is I don't like any missing link in my mind. I don't like anything to be out of place. So I want to get into this a little bit later too, but when I travel around on foot, I often think about the route that I'm going to travel before I travel it, and I like every little twist and turn to make sense. And if there's a part of the sidewalk that's got wet pavement on it, or there's a part of the sidewalk that's busted up due to construction, that takes away from the sense that I've made of a situation, and it gets confusing. And when I'm thinking about a plumbing system or an electrical system or anything like this, I like to know how everything fits together, so I really know where each part is, and that the whole picture, the whole map makes sense to me in my mind. And I do the same thing with my sensory science and with my palate, the way that I've trained it. I have aromas and flavors and textures as vocabulary words compartmentalized in my mind, and I sort of access them the same way as I'd access points on a grid, understanding how things fit together and making nothing but sense of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And it made me think, well, let me get to the other thing first, and then I'll get back to that.
Sure.
The other thing that you said that I thought was amazing was that, that your parents taught you and your brother that, you had to be stewards for your own lives and advocates for yourself, I think is what you said, or something.
Sure. Yes. Mm-hmm.
How did you? So I'm going to ask you: did you ever, were you always okay with being treated the same as your brother, or were you ever frustrated and been like, "Come on, let's give me a break," sort of thing?
Well, they did actually, and that's what's so interesting.
Okay.
They knew there were things that I did differently, and they knew that things took me a little longer, and that was always fine. The time taken was always fine, but and they didn't mind if the results were a little bit different, but they never held a lower bar. So if I got a B and my brother got an A, I mean, we weren't competitive. So let me go back and say, if I got a B and not an A, that was fine with them. They just wanted me to own that. And that's the sort of expectation that they had, is that we would own our lives and our grades and what we did. And, it's so interesting because I had an assistant in elementary school. You might call her an aide, because they thought I needed a one-on-one aide. But when I got to sixth grade and was headed off to middle school, I fought, not with my parents, with the school district, not to have an aide, because I wanted, and I made sure of this in elementary school as well, their whole attitude of take responsibility for yourself and for your life and for what you do really translates to, if you succeed in something, that is your success to celebrate. And if you fail at something, well, you get to take the blame for that too. And I don't say have to take the blame. I say get to take the blame, because it is a luxury when we can take full responsibility for something and not, blame others. Like, oh, my aide wasn't here, so I couldn't do this work, and that's why I got a bad grade. No, I need to figure out how to do it myself. And they held the same level of expectation, but they didn't expect me to learn to drive when I was 15, for instance. They were super practical about that. And they were very approachable and very helpful in letting us do our best in different situations. One thing was, we always did all our own work on the house that we lived in. We really didn't like to hire work out. So, as I would go about my life, we would all have different things that we would do. And maybe I wasn't, cutting with the table saw. Maybe I was doing something else, nailing in shingles or bringing things to the person who was nailing in shingles and helping, and supporting. But we all had our roles. We all had our things that we did, and they might be slightly different, but everybody's contributing. So there was never a, hey, you need to treat me, a little bit softer, because I was always treated very fairly.
Okay. And getting back, something else just popped into my mind about the not wanting to get your sight back because you have to relearn things and that kind of thing. And I wondered too, like if you did get your sight back, it might just reorder everything that to be true, right? Because you've created visuals for whatever it is that you experience, right? And
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So things would get reordered. I mean, imagine, I know what a Fuji apple feels like and smells like and tastes like, and that's just what a Fuji apple is. I know that. If I had to look at a Fuji apple, I have no idea how my brain would parse that. I have to retrain my brain. And I think of, like, oh man, I imagine sitting in a car and looking out the window sometimes. And I just think, how overwhelming would it be to drive down a city street looking at everything and trying to make sense of it? Like, I feel like without my eyesight, I have far less distractions than you guys do. And I'm able to focus my mind a little bit more because I don't have all this stimulus coming in all at once, So I actually, not having eyesight has been a real blessing in a lot of ways.
So let's, I just love that perspective. Let's talk about your love of science, because everybody that's listening, and you probably get this everywhere you go, like of all the things that you could learn without being able to see, science seems like the thing.
Organic chemistry.
Yeah, you would most need to see, because it's based on, a lot of it is based on observations, right?
It is, yeah. So I have a story about this. As I've said, I've always had the heart of a teacher. And when I was in high school, I was a nerd. And I knew what I knew is I didn't know much about my future career, but I knew that I wanted to teach. And I thought it would be great to teach at a college or university level. And I was really, really excited by that. Didn't know what I wanted to teach, but had a really good honors chemistry instructor. Now, she was interesting because I went to her. The honors chemistry course was junior year. I had her for physical science, and she was okay with that as a freshman, and I really loved the chemistry unit. Balancing chemical equations, understanding reactivity, this sort of thing made sense to me. I don't know why, but it made sense. And towards the end of my sophomore year, I went back to her because I knew she was teaching honors chemistry, and I said, I want to take honors chemistry. She said, you do? I said, yeah. And she said, well, I don't know how that's going to work. You only have to take up through biology, and you're doing that this year. How are you going to know what's happening in the lab? I said, well, let's find a student who wants to be a TA, a teacher's assistant, who's already taken the course before. And she said, well, let's check with the district, see if they're okay with having you in lab and all this. And I found that student. She was a year older than me, and she was just a great person and super supportive. And she was my eyes in the lab. And she was also my reader and scribe for in-class worksheets and exams. But most importantly, she mitigated that risk factor of me being in the lab. Now, all the time that I had this teacher, she was really inspiring, really good teacher, just kind of infectious. I really got to love chemistry. But she would tell the class, chemistry is the whole class, when we're all sitting in the lecture hall. Oh, chemistry is amazing. It's what we live and breathe. It's what we drink out of our water glass. Chemistry is everything around you. You all should pursue chemistry more. And then I would talk to her and I would say, man, I want to pursue chemistry. How do you recommend I do it? She'd say, gosh, I just don't know if it's practical, Hoby. You can't see. I don't. We use our eyes to study chemistry, and it might not make sense. And I thought, oh man, I felt a little dejected. But I knew there was some way to get through to her that I honestly could study chemistry if I wanted to badly enough. And it was the second week of the second semester of that junior year. I remember it to this day. I went into her classroom before school, and I said, I want to tell you something. You tell me that we use our eyes to do chemistry, but I don't think you can see an atom. I certainly can't. And I think chemistry is a cerebral science. I think it's something that we think about. Our eyesight is great for telling us things that are happening and understanding color changes and reading through large data samples and this sort of thing. Yeah, eyesight is super useful, but none of us can see atoms, right? And from that moment, she became my biggest ally and supporter and comrade, really, and just someone who would always walk the walk with me and help me figure out how to make everything accessible. And I mean, she was and still is an incredible teacher. And I really think that's true. And for others listening to the podcast, I just want to sort of emphasize the fact that I really think it's amazing how our careers get shaped by that great high school teacher or that great university teacher. Right. And that is what I wanted to be. So I went on to the University of California, Davis, and started taking chemistry. I was a chemistry major. I found an excellent, amazing assistant out there who was, smarter at chemistry than me and had a bachelor's degree in math and biology from MIT, and just an amazing person who's still working at UC Davis, helping students like me, really making science and math accessible, and just an incredible person. And I had the absolute fortune of being able to work with her and call her a great friend as well for all of my undergraduate and graduate career. So that was an amazing thing to have that person to work with and understand things through. So it was really a benefit. And I attribute a lot of my success in the sciences to her being able to make things accessible to me using tactile diagrams and this sort of thing, and just reading aloud. But I was able to, and then I did find other assistants to help me in the wet laboratory. So in the undergraduate laboratory, I did have to find assistants to, be my eyes basically. And it was doable. It was a hassle, but it was totally doable. And at that point, I knew that what I wanted to do is I wanted to be that teacher who could come into the lecture hall full of totally hungover freshmen at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning and teach that intro to chemistry course and inspire as many as I possibly could of that group of students to actually like chemistry and to appreciate it. And that's the path that I wanted to follow. But I didn't know that teaching, or if a graduate career in chemistry would be practical. I also have a deep, deep love of history and ended up studying U.S. history as well, and was ready to submit applications to history programs throughout the state of California for graduate programs when I met my graduate advisor, who would become my graduate advisor, a man named Professor Dean Tantillo. And Dean is a computational chemist and is on my short list of absolutely life-changing mentors. And simply put, I really think that a mentor sees a future for their mentee probably before that mentee sees that future for him or herself. And those people are huge assets to all of our lives. And I think we should all, I'd encourage each and every one of your listeners to seek out those amazing mentors and those amazing people and really go forward with them and work with them and learn from them. Really, just find good mentors and connect with them. Sorry for that little diversion, but I really believe in mentoring and coaching, and I do some of that myself. So I'd love to chat with any of your listeners that would want to talk about that just sort of creating, motivation and creating that efficiency. I'll get into efficiency a little bit later. Sorry, the sort of stream of consciousness here, but ultimately I found a love for organic chemistry, and in Dean's group, I studied computational organic chemistry. And what I can tell you that I think is going to bring this full circle about organic chemistry and why I am good at thinking about organic chemistry in my mind and doing chemistry in my mind, because I claim, it feels this way in my head, I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but I feel that I use the same skills for my survival as a blind traveler that I use to think about navigating a molecular structure, so a collection of atoms all bonded together. So to me, thinking about adding a chlorine to a benzene ring and the mechanism that allows that to happen using aluminum chloride, which is something called the Friedel-Crafts alkylation, is not that different. And thinking about where all the little atoms are in space is not very different for me than thinking about how to get from this chair in my home office where I'm sitting to the local grocery store on foot. I can think in terms of, when I think about a city, in terms of meters and kilometers and miles and the distances that we all know. There's absolutely no reason we can't scale those distances down and think about nanometers and angstroms and all these things at an atomic and molecular level. And I know some very good blind astrophysicists, and I like to use the same thing and say, what's the difference between a mile and a light year? Well, really, when you put it into perspective, it's not much. It's just scale. So that's why, as a blind guy, I really feel like I'm good at understanding and performing organic chemistry in my mind. Now, the limitations come into place because diagrams are used to portray the chemistry, and I need to figure out ways of getting stuff from visuals into my mind, and then getting my work from my mind back out into the chemistry world, which is, fortunately or unfortunately, quite a visual world.
Okay. So
sorry, that was a lot.
No, that was great stuff, because every time I just sit back and listen to you, and I'm sure that the people who are listening to this will feel the same thing. I feel like, man, I've quit on a lot of things too early, So, so I applaud you for that. And I wanted to ask you about quitting. My understanding, and it may be wrong, but my understanding of organic chemistry is that's sort of the class where people who think they want to be physicians, for example, or scientists often wash out because
it's true.
It's difficult. And it made me think, from the time you decided you wanted to study chemistry in high school, college, graduate work, and ultimately to your PhD, was there a time when you were like, this is too hard, I might want to turn back?
Yes, there were those times, and I think we all have those times when we question whether this is really what we want to be doing. But what it takes is one of the things that's given me drive all the way through my life, and which will continue to drive me throughout the rest of my career, is my love for taking on challenges. What's the hardest thing a blind guy can study in college? Well, it's probably organic chemistry. Can we do it? Let's give it a try. It's really that idea of taking a challenge and working so hard and then succeeding at that challenge. But you know what, Mike, it's really interesting. I have a theory that if you just have a good work ethic and you put the time in, organic chemistry takes time. I spent 25 hours in my main organic chemistry coursework. I spent between 25 and 40 hours a week just on organic chemistry. And what I did that a lot of students don't do is I read the textbook, every word, and I worked with my assistant to make diagrams of most pictures that were hard to describe. And I would do this before lecture. And when the professor followed the book, which most do, lecture felt like a review. And then the assignments were just applying that knowledge to the review. And the exams were just making sure that you knew what was being reviewed. So that literally, you have to take things on like jobs in order to succeed. And one, it's baby steps. When I got into the PhD program at Davis, I said, oh my God, how am I going to get this PhD? I don't know. But you know what? You don't know if you don't try. And the biggest time when I felt like quitting was when I started teaching in graduate school. And this is about 2 years before graduating, and realized that students that I was teaching don't speak chemistry. They want to see pictures of things and understand it through diagrams. And I'm like, well, I would then spend my time working with an assistant to make beautiful diagrams that hopefully made the chemistry make more sense. And then I had to learn those diagrams so I could talk through them. And grading exams was hard because it was all, written with pencil and paper. So I realized that there were a lot of inefficiencies with teaching. And one of the other hurdles that was hard to overcome was that papers, the literature that's written in the organic chemistry world is, it's like there's just few enough words that it makes the pictures hard to understand. When authors refer to structure B, and it's like, okay, well, what is structure B? I would have to actually sit down and read papers with an assistant. And we did a lot of great work to make a lot of what I did in the lab fully accessible to me with minimal sighted assistance, using a combination of 3D printing and some scripts that we wrote in-house, and computer scripts, and this sort of thing. But reading papers was always hard and discouraging, and teaching, unfortunately, became discouraging because I needed so much assistance doing it. And those are times when I thought, I don't know if this is for me, but I'm too close to the finish line. I got to just push on and get through, And
it seems like, technology is evolving the way it is. It seems like what you need to be a great teacher, which would eliminate some of the frustrating things, is probably closer now than, or probably closer to being real now than it certainly was.
Oh, I think it is. And I will teach chemistry someday. It's something I love. But the other part of this that I want to be clear about is you have to be willing this is a really important life message for me anyway. It was for me. You have to be willing to say at the end of something as long and arduous as a PhD, if that's not the right career for you, don't be ashamed. Move on to what feels more right. And life is about learning. And everything that I've done that's non-chemistry related and chemistry related have been tremendous learning experiences. So do as I say, not as I do. I do end up getting stressed out a lot by business and by trying to get things to work. But what I say is if you treat everything as a learning experience, you can just learn from mistakes and learn from areas where you might feel like you're failing. Use it as a learning experience. I guarantee I've learned more in the past 4 years about business and entrepreneurship than I ever could have learned in an MBA program. I guarantee it.
Oh, I'm sure you did. But you also learned more just by becoming a PhD in computational chemistry than anybody.
Well, it taught me how to think critically.
Yeah.
It taught me really how to think critically and how to problem solve. But a lot of people ask me, what's the most important skill that you learned in college? And I say, I learned how to speak and I learned how to write. And if you can be compelling in your verbiage and your writing, you can do anything. I really do feel that way.
No matter what you want to do, right?
It doesn't matter.
I totally agree.
It doesn't matter. Be able to communicate your message. And this is one thing that's so hard about the digital world and the fact that things are becoming so much more pictorial and social media driven. And, with people sort of shortening attention spans is that, writing becomes less important. I still think it's very important, but I must admit, a bit concerned about, where the world is headed with people not having super long attention spans anymore.
I'm going to apologize here, but I'm going to reveal my ignorance, and I need your help with telling me or explaining to me what computational organic chemistry actually is.
No, there's no apology needed at all. Computational organic chemistry is using computers to figure out things about organic molecules. And organic molecules are anything that contain carbon. The element carbon makes something organic. And what we did in the Tantillo group is we used quantum mechanics in the computer to figure out reaction mechanisms, so to figure out where electrons would go to turn one thing into another thing. Because electrons whiz around, and all chemical reactivity is electrons moving from one point to another, and basically breaking bonds and making bonds. And we used computers to figure out and elucidate which bonds were being formed and which bonds were being broken. And we used something mostly called transition state theory to do that. So we'd find the process that takes the least amount of energy. You have to use a lot of your own, chemical sense to understand, okay, these are the processes that could happen, right? These are the processes that could happen, maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe 15. And then you study all those processes and you find the lowest energy process, and you have a guess. It's always a guess, but a much better guess and hypothesis as to how those electrons move to turn one thing into another. And what I like to say is electrons are no different than people. They're no different than cows in a field. They don't want to work harder than they have to work. So they're always going to take the path of least energy.
And is quantum computing, did that come out of, or was it the reverse?
Could you ask that question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering if you mentioned quantum,
quantum mechanics.
Quantum mechanics. My mind went to quantum computing, right? So I didn't know if that was born out of this attempt to better understand organic chemistry, or was it the reverse?
It was kind of the reverse. So quantum computing is quite different than what we were doing in some ways. What we did is we basically used computers to solve complicated math problems that are driven by quantum mechanics. And that's really what it is. Quantum computing, and I can see the association, is a bit of a different thing.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a great question.
So, yeah, like I said, I was revealing my ignorance.
No. It's a great question.
So let's move into your entrepreneurial start? Because oftentimes, at least the traditional wisdom, I suppose, is that academics aren't entrepreneurs, right? So
people say that, yeah.
Yeah. So here you go. You're certainly an academic with a PhD. You have a desire to teach. You've sort of, I mean, you've accomplished something that is very difficult for someone with their full senses to do. You've done it without being able to see anything, and then you decide, well, and you said it's okay to change. Don't worry about it if it's, but usually the entrepreneurialism comes out of the chemistry, right? So you might go work at a lab or something, and you
Right.
bring something, and then you try to get funding for it and that kind of thing. So Hoby, I'm just curious, like, tell us how you became an entrepreneur.
It's a great question. I realize that I've always been kind of entrepreneurial. I've always liked doing things for people that solve a problem and getting remunerated for that. So when I was 6 years old, I had a route up and down my street, and I would take people's trash cans out to the curb for them and pull them back in after garbage day. And they would pay me a small amount, but it was something. So I think the entrepreneurial nature came before the academic, really. It was always this desire to figure out what problems people are having. There's the type of entrepreneur that I feel like I am is I like to, and I think this is any entrepreneur, but I really like to find a problem and figure out a solution to that problem. So that's how I became entrepreneurial. And what I really figured out is that the same sense of problem solving that you might use as a research chemist, you can use. That's called being a chemist. It's also called being a design thinker. It's also called being an entrepreneur and finding problems that people need solved. But for me, the foundation of SensePoint was, and I realized, and I'm going to admit my mistake here. I co-founded that company as if it was a company that was scalable, but really what SensePoint was me allowing my clients to get access to the way that I thought about and approached the world. So that's really what I sold at the beginning of SensePoint. And it was good. It was fun. It was a startup, so it took time to build that real success. But I then, in 2019, my business partner Justin Vallandingham and I realized that we really are doing some design work for our clients, but we need to offer more. We need to offer creative services. So we found and met with an amazing creative thinker and creative director of a fairly large studio, who is actually based in Adelaide, Australia. And we partnered up with him as SensePoint, and now offer a lot of all sorts of branding and brand strategy services in the food and beverage industry. We've dabbled in some other industries, but the issue is that there's some confusion around offering branding services, but also offering my, I hope, unique and valuable perspective, and offering blindfolded tastings, which we can get to in a minute. All these things together as under one company roof, one brand roof. It takes time to realize this. We realize it doesn't make sense. So we're undergoing a rebrand where, and this is the ability and the need to figure out where the lines are drawn and be able to adapt and make the right decision. And so what we are doing is we're in the process of creating one brand, which is a brand that does branding and strategy work, business and brand strategy work for food and drink. And that's it. That's what it does. Another brand, which will stay SensePoint, that does branding and development support for the nonprofit industry or for the for-profit industry, with anyone who's working to make the world a little bit of a better place, whether it's making the world more accessible to blind people, to making wonderful pureed food products for the senior population, anything to make the world a better place. That's what the company that's maintaining the name SensePoint. And I'm really pulling all of my sort of unique perspective and coaching and mentoring work under my own personal brand. And the reason this makes sense is that I am me, I'm doing my own thing, but I want to create companies that can scale without me needing to sit on each and every project. So the reason I walk you all through that journey is because I think it's an important journey to admit those mistakes. And it's not answering the question of why did I become an entrepreneur? How did that happen? Which I hope I answered, a minute ago. But I really did want to carry you through this little journey here.
And how do you see that? You mentioned the word scaling a couple of times. So if the sensory part of you is what is the differentiator when it comes to the way you experience products, whether it's the way that, like I read something that said Hoby thinks about how your water bottle sounds.
Right.
So and now in food and drink, it's not about seeing, it's not about what it looks like, it's about what it feels like, I guess, with the other. So my question is, how do you get it to the point where your unique perspective, given your advantages, is not, someone else can do, or a machine can do, or something?
Well, I like to, where needed, I like to come in and really advise on branding projects to make sure that, and where we're going, by the way, in the 21st century, is that people care deeply about how something looks, but they care just as much about how it sounds, smells, tastes, and feels. So we try to bring brands to light with all of those sensory inputs, and that's really what we do. And I do love advising in those areas, and that's a lot of what I'll do personally. And I'll advise the company, but I'll do it under me and help out on projects where it's needed, for sure. But I also love the idea of training people to really think about this. And I think everybody can understand this and learn from it over time. Let me just give you a bit of insight into what it is that I think I do. I think that without eyesight, I have a hyper sense of awareness of the world around me, which starts with being sensory literate. Okay, what do I mean by that? I love helping people become more sensory literate so that they can do kind of what I like to think that I offer as a uniqueness in their everyday lives. Well, I think we should be able to bring in information from all five senses, each and every one of them, into our mind and process that information intelligently and make logical deductions about that information. So you're visually literate. If I showed you a picture of a red fence and said, "What's this, Mike?" you'd be able to tell me that's a red fence. You know it's a fence because you've seen enough of those throughout your life. But you've had this vocabulary word, which you associate with the color red in your mind since you were a young child. So that is literally a color becomes a definition. But we use our eyesight to understand 85 to 90% of the world around us. And that means that we have 4 additional perfectly good senses, which we're only using to obtain and understand 10 to 15% of the world around us. And I think eyesight is so overused, dare I say overused, is because it's just so easy to use. It's not a vulnerable sense. It's just a really easy sense to use and to glean information from. And what I like to do is teach people how to listen rather than hear, how to feel the chair under them, smell the air in the room that you're sitting in right now. The room that I'm in is a spare bedroom converted into an office. I smell linens that have been in a closet. And it's just about understanding the world around you. And I think we all can do it, but it's like playing a guitar. It's like learning how to do something takes practice. And I've been working at this hours and hours a day for, I think, my whole life, realistically. And I just think that being sensory literate leads to all of us being able to be more aware. And awareness, I think, leads deeply to being more inclusive as a thought leader and as someone who does whatever they do in their life. You just become aware, and that awareness makes you more inclusive.
And where did it start for you? I mean, I know that you somehow happened to meet Francis Ford Coppola, and you started doing blind wine tastings.
Yeah, tastings in the dark. Yeah.
In the dark. Yeah. I'm just. Is that where it started, or was? I mean, you mentioned early on that the cereal shakes. That's where the
Yeah.
cereal is and the milk, and you started talking about that stuff. I'm wondering where did the traction come from for you to pursue this business?
It all started in the kitchen when I was growing up. I've had a love for cooking, and I would always appreciate smelling things and trying to identify them. Can I identify these things? And the harder they got, the more I would hone myself. And it kind of felt like a game at the time, but I realized it was anything but a game. It was training myself and my non-visual senses to be super aware. And then I took that skill to the experiences that we innovated with Francis Ford Coppola and many other companies revolving around the blindfolded experiences. And I even took it beyond food and drink to a high school when I was still in graduate school. Actually, a high school just north of me called Credo High School is a Waldorf charter high school where we used these sort of blindfolded exercises to train high school students how to be more aware and empathetic. And that's kind of where this whole idea, where it all started to make sense, is a culmination of working with the winery, working with many other companies, food and drink companies predominantly, doing blindfolded work, and then teaching these high school students how to be more aware and empathetic under using the blindfold as a tool, as a vehicle, if you will.
Mm.
And I think that's where this whole thing got started, where I said, I don't necessarily want to work 9 to 5 for someone else. I went to my business partner, Justin, who has a much stronger business sense than I do, which is a very good thing for me. And we decided together to start this company and to think about this way of thinking.
So let me ask you one more question about the tastings, because I've been to several wine tastings in my life, and you're sort of taught to how to swirl the glass and then look at how the wine sort of drapes itself off the inside of the glass and all of these things, and then of course the tasting as well. So what were you doing? I'm just really intrigued by what a tasting in the dark was
and is.
Yeah.
What we do is we blindfold people from the very beginning before we even pour wine.
Okay.
So they might see the empty glasses on the table, or they might not. And we get a blindfold on at the very beginning. The most effective ones are the hardest to run, especially with a large group. But what I like to do for those is blindfold people outside the room that we're going to be in. And then I walk them into the room. And basically what the blindfold does is it takes away the distraction of eyesight. I don't like to call it vision, because I think we all have vision. Some of us just happen to lack eyesight.
Mm.
But it takes away the distraction of eyesight and gives us the opportunity to really listen to the conversation around us and use our non-visual senses differently. So we go around the table and we talk about how wine is an art. We talk about really the intersection of art and science that wine provides. And then we go into how you don't need to see to enjoy life. That is a really important message. And I had people, if it's a small enough group, go around the table and introduce themselves and just tell me a little bit about themselves and what it is that they love about wine or don't like about wine. Just get to know the group a little bit, because they're all feeling a little bit uncomfortable. And the whole point is to feel comfortable and be disarmed and let our guard down. I usually prepare little aroma samples for people to smell and understand and think through, and really to calibrate our aromatic vocabularies, if you will. And they're usually things that will appear in the wine, just as aromas in the wine, when we get to the wines. And then we start to taste the wines, and I go through a whole exercise where we smell the wine and we talk about what we smell. We do a little party trick where you cover the glass with your hand and hold your hand over the top, lift it off and smell. And then we do a total analysis of the aroma, and then we start to taste the wine, sometimes paired with food, mostly not. Talk about how it feels on our palate, and then we ask people, is it red or white? And then we ask them to try to guess a varietal. And it's kind of just a fun little game factor. If they can't do that so well, it's not a big deal to me at all. And then we go through a flight of anywhere from 3 to 8 wines that way. And it's, for lack of a better word, it's really, really eye-opening for some people. I actually did an experience just this last year that had nothing to do with wine. Well, there was wine served, but what it was the pasta company Barilla really wanted to release one of their, do a big brand launch for a new line of sauces that they're making in Italy and selling in the United States. And it's the first sauce that they've actually made in Italy for the US market with all, fresh ingredients, and each sauce features a hero ingredient. So they wanted a really unique experience for these, 60 or so media that they brought in, media and influencers. So I actually took a trip to Italy, went to the different origins of each hero ingredient, interviewed people, got a bunch of audio and olfactory, which is smell, footage, brought it back and had a whole setup as partnered with Barilla and an agency called Edelman, which has an office actually quite close to you, as does Barilla America, in the Chicagoland area. And in Manhattan, New York, we had a great space that was a white space that could be easily transformed. We blindfolded people and we brought them into this room that to them was a little bit echoey and maybe a little bit cold. We did a whole tasting around the sauces and hero ingredients, including ingredients that I brought back from Italy and sounds that I played from Italy and all these sorts of things. And while they were under blindfold, we transformed the room around them into an Italian sort of decor with all of the branding and all of the art deco associated with the sauce. And when the blindfolds came off, it was this amazing reveal. They were in this beautiful space with a lot of high top tables and bars all around. And it was just like, it was so transformative for them because they were kept cocooned in their world under blindfold. And then we took the blindfolds off and miraculously we were in this really amazing space.
So thank you for sharing that. So obviously it's very clear having talked with you all this time that you're a great storyteller.
Oh, well, you're kind to say that.
And you're very comfortable, it seems, telling stories or experiencing things with people. I
love it.
You've got a TEDx talk as well, which is a high pressure sort of thing. And I'm wondering, did your abilities to do that, is that natural or is that something you've been trained on? And
No, it's my comfort zone.
It's your comfort zone. Okay.
Yeah, I love it. I just
so many for whom it's not.
I've learned how to use my words when it's hard to communicate by pointing. And it all comes back to being a young blind person. And what my parents say is that I never used any baby talk or anything like that. When I was 2 years old, I was speaking normally because in order to get my point across and communicate with the world, I had to learn English really fast. So I love it. I love speaking with people like yourself more than just about anything. This is so much fun, and it just feels natural.
Never nervous, huh?
Oh, I get nervous. No, I mean, not, when I was walking out on the TEDx stage, my heart was thumping. But you need to feel a certain amount of that nervousness.
Right, in order to
you got to be nervous.
Yeah, you're right. You got to be uncomfortable in order to challenge yourself and deliver something that's more than what you thought you could, right?
We always hope so. You never know if that's what the outcome's going to be.
Good point.
You always hope so.
Good point.
Yeah, I just think one thing I would tell folks who are listening is anytime you want to chat about life or about anything that you're dealing with, give me a call. I'm an open book and I love talking to anyone. So anyone who wants to connect or reach out, it's great. There's another piece of advice that I live by that my dear friend and wonderful mentor, Mark Parrish, taught me. And it actually comes from the Cadet's Prayer of 1814, developed by, it came out of the U.S. Army group in 1814. And that line is, always take the harder right rather than the easier wrong. So rebranding right now, it's hard. It's a lot of work, but it feels like the right thing to do. And it's better to take the harder right than to take the easier wrong of just keeping on going when your messaging is confusing. And I just want all your listeners to think about that and let it sink in. The harder right seems to me to always be better than the easier wrong.
Well, it certainly seems to be the way that you've lived your life, Hoby. And
I don't know if it's always been right, but it's been a challenge and it's been fun. Let me tell you that.
Well, what's been fun and not a challenge is talking to you today. You were so gracious in asking people to feel free to reach out to you. How would you like people to reach out to you?
The best way is just to email me, and my email address is Hoby. That's HOB like boy Y at sensepointdesign.com. That's SEN like Nancy S point POINT design.com. So we don't have the extra E on SensePoint.
Okay.
And that'll always be a good way to get a hold of me. And if I'll ask that you can put that in the notes with the podcast as well.
Okay, I will definitely do that. And I just want to say thank you so much for making time for me today and for us. It's been fantastic to get a better understanding of who you are and how you've become who you've become. And I'm blown away and very excited about your entrepreneurial path and your personal brand, because you have a brand that people need to see and experience. Even if they can't see, they need to see it and experience it.
Mike, I'm deeply humbled and honored to have been invited to join you on the show. And I think your story is fascinating. I wish we could have dove into that a little bit more, because I think it's a great story that you and I talked about on a previous conversation. But no, I really appreciate you. I really appreciate the fact that you're putting this podcast out there and using it as a motivational tool. So thank you.
Well, thanks for being part of the How Did It Happen experience.
I look forward to getting to know all your listeners.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How Did It Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How Did It Happen podcast.